It's smooth, most of your mouth, and I'm talking with my mouth full, which is not a good thing. You shouldn't do that, but I'm doing it. Hi folks, I'm Nik Sharma, and today at Food 52 I am showing you how to make cookies that melt in your mouth. We're going to use chocolate chip cookies as an example, and we're going to use two ingredients that make cookies melt: icing sugar and custard powder. So yo-yo cookies are very popular cookie in countries like Australia and even in New Zealand, where they use custard powder to make the cookies. And the cookies acquire a texture which basically melts in your mouth. This is what we're going to use today: Bird's custard powder. Use the second ingredient, which is icing sugar, or confectioner's sugar, or powdered sugar, depending on where you live. Confectioner's sugar is basically sugar crystals that have been taken and they're pounded down to get a fine powder. This is my short science lesson for you today. We're going to start with an apple. And you must be wondering why am I not holding a cookie? Let's imagine if I cut this apple in half. Okay. These are the two molecules present in wheat flour that form gluten. So we've got these two molecules. Now if we don't add anything and just water, they'll come together, they'll form a tight bond, and they form gluten. Gluten is what makes a cookie, or rather bread, chewy. We want those proteins to come together and make a chewy structure. However, in cookie batters, what happens is we're adding fat, in this case butter, you can add oil, and even nut fat. And what happens is that it nestles in between. We're adding cornstarch in the form of custard powder. It's going to nestle itself in between, and gluten can't form. And so your cookie doesn't become tough. The next ingredient that also jumps in here is sugar. So we've got a confectioner's sugar. It's going to sit in between the apples, and there's no gluten formed. So that's my science lesson for you for today. So we're going to start with the butter. I've got unsalted butter that I'd weighed out earlier, and it's softened to room temperature, which makes it easier during beating. So I'm using the paddle attachment on my stand mixer. I'm going to add the butter in here. One big chunk of a lot of good butter. And I'm going to beat this for a couple of minutes till it starts to become pale and fluffy. Okay, this is looking pretty good. So it's light and fluffy because of all the air that's getting incorporated into the butter. Now we're going to do something really quick, which is a one-step process. I'm going to sift the flour, the cornstarch, and the confectioner's sugar directly over this, along with coffee powder. I'm using coffee powder because I feel it gives an extra edge, especially when you're using chocolate. You can use espresso powder. You'll need a fine mesh sieve, and I'm going to put that on top. Directly just going to dump my flour on top, the confectioner's sugar, and the custard powder. And then quickly, I'm gonna sift this. This helps get rid of any big lumps or chunks that might be present. Now, put this back on the mixer. All right, so start on really low speed because everything is so, I'm gonna call it food dust, but that's what's gonna happen. Everything's gonna fly out, so just to be careful, we're gonna start on low speed. And once everything's wet, we'll bump it up. Sometimes a stand mixer needs help too. So take your spatula and just wipe everything down. This is something you should always do. This way, anything that's heavy and gets stuck to the bottom has a chance to mix. I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of milk. I'm using whole milk. You can also use 2%. And I'm going to add, and this is something I forgot to do, which I talked to you about earlier, but I'm going to add instant coffee. This is something I should have sifted, but you'll see it doesn't make that much of a difference. And I am going to add a little bit of vanilla. Now it's supposed to add 1/4 teaspoon. You can add more if you like vanilla. By all means, go ahead and add more. Like I said, no one's gonna arrest you if you add more vanilla. I'm going to bring this back up and start mixing it again. For the final bit, my chocolate chips, and I am going to add the chocolate. You can either fold the chocolate chips in with the spatula, or what I'd really like to do is toss the chocolate chips into the cookie dough, run it for a couple of seconds. This also helps the chocolate get incorporated, but it also helps shatter some of these chips, and so you get these different textures inside the cookie once it bakes, which I personally like. So if you want to do that, go ahead. It sounds like a woodpecker tapping on a tree, but with an aggressive motion. All right, so I'm gonna toss these chocolate chips in, and now I am going to give it a quick blend. That's it. It's really fast. You have two options with cookies. You can let this dough, you can roll up the dough, let it sit in your refrigerator for a couple of hours to firm up, or two, you could make the dough today, freeze it, and it will last good in your refrigerator for up to a month. What I'm going to do today is actually bake them and without waiting, and I found that that's also fine. It really doesn't affect the texture of the cookies, at least in this recipe. So I've got my oven preheated to 350 Fahrenheit degrees, and I'll bake these cookies. I'll shape and bake them. To shape the cookies, you can use an ice cream scoop or a tablespoon like I'm going to use. Now I am going to shape it into a circle that's about 2 inches wide, and I'm going to lay them out on my baking sheet. You should get about 20 cookies, around 20 to 25 cookies, depending on how much you use with each spoonful. So I've got my cookies laid out, and I am going to bake them in the oven for about 15 to 20 minutes. As soon as they start to firm up, so my cookies are ready. I'm going to pull them out of the oven and then transfer them to a wire rack to cool completely, and then we're going to eat them. So we've got a couple of cookies. I'm ready to taste them, and they look so delicious. Look at them. They've got chocolate chips inside, which is one of my favorite cookies. And let's take a look at the texture. Now the test is in the bite, so it has to melt in your mouth. So here you go, folks. Here's an excellent way to change the texture of your cookie by making them melt in your mouth. You don't have to use chocolate chips, even though we're using those today. You could use crystallized ginger, you could use nuts, you could use sesame seeds. It's custard powder provides an excellent way, along with icing sugar, to make your cookies melt in your mouth. So go ahead, get the recipe at Food 52 and bake these cookies.